All right, good morning and welcome to Grant Management Training for the Juvenile Programs and Interventions Division. What does Grant Management require for the Crime Commission and more specifically for the Juvenile Programs and Interventions Division? Being the expert, it's about knowing all aspects of your program, the needs of those you serve and those you don't serve, but needed services and the community dynamics. Basically knowing the project inside and out. It is about asking questions. That's what we're here for, to support your programs and to help you be the experts. Understanding how you are taking the funds and molding them to the services to improve the lives of youth, families, staff, and community members. This will give you the credibility to build the program capacity. Meeting deadlines. Effectively managing a grant means meeting the deadlines. It begins the minute you read the RFA, request for application. The first thing to look at are, do we qualify? How much money will we receive? And when is the grant application due? All paperwork and requests dealing with the grant has a deadline. So it's important to be ahead of the game. And as the funder, we really should never have to say, where is that report? Documentation, especially now more than ever with our most recent audits, documentation is key. Data records, financial records, and information for program monitoring. Outcomes, determining what you're doing works. Is it a good investment of the money? Is it making a difference in the lives of those you serve? And is it measurable? The Juvenile Justice Institute will be working with communities to measure effective outcomes through data entry into the juvenile case management system. Accountability. You signed a contract, and by doing this, we have entered into a legally binding relationship. Just like any relationship, we have to communicate effectively, be honest, and trustworthy, be responsible for doing our part, and let each other know when there's any trouble and help needed. Following the rules, trying your best to meet deadlines set forth in each grant program. And when you make a mistake, come forward and just talk with us about it. You'll find out soon, if you don't already know, that we understand the demands are great for the grant management, and we'd rather have you talk to us sooner about the issue than later so that we can resolve it. Information. Everything you need to know about how to manage the grant is in the Community-Based Aid Guidebook. Everyone should have a copy of this and be familiar with the contents. If you don't, you can access it from the nebraska.gov Community-Based Aid Juvenile Services website. It is a PDF that's downloadable. Nebraska Revised Statutes 43-2404.01 and 43-2404.02 outline the requirements of this program. You can also find the eligibility of the grant requirements in the grant application instructions and also the award and special conditions. The Cba Guidebook and Title 75 Chapter 1 provide detail on allowable costs, process for reporting, both JCMS and financial, and project change requests. Those both can be found at our nccnebraska.gov website. This is just the cover of the financial guidebook, so you have a reference as to what we're talking about. Grant award and special conditions. This training is geared to management of the grant after it has been awarded to ensure the grantee or subgrantee remain in compliance with the grant rules. When the grant has been approved and all contingencies have been met, the county or tribe will receive the grant award and special conditions. No funds can be distributed until NCC has received the signed grant award and special conditions, including subawards. The subgrantee or grantee needs to ensure that the award is correct. You need to check the grantee or subgrantee name, grant number, the budgeted amount, make sure it's correct, the grant period, and authorize the signatures. The award needs to be signed by the grantee or subgrantee's lead contact, financial lead, and authorized official. The special conditions must be signed by the lead contact, secondary contact, financial lead, and authorized official. It is important that each individual signing the award read the special conditions because the special conditions outline requirements for grant compliance with the program. Each individual signing the special conditions is responsible for making sure the grantee or subgrantee is in compliance with the program. You must retain a copy of your grant award and special conditions for reference and monitoring purposes. It is important that all information is correct on the grant award, so please look through the figures carefully to ensure that all align with your records. The grantee is the lead county, tribe, or agency whom the entity that is financially responsible for this grant award. The grant number changes from year to year. Therefore, please use the grant number on all correspondence when referring to the grant award amount. The date in the award denotes when the Crime Commission Board approved the funding. Please be sure all figures are correct and aligned with yours. You are required to meet match if match is required on the grant award. We did not require that this year. And if monitored, will be responsible for providing that documentation. Be sure that you obtain all the appropriate signatures on the grant award, which includes the signatures of the authorized official, project director, and financial officer. So here we have an example of what this year's grant award looks like. The special conditions are standard requirements that apply to every county, tribe, agency, entity, and program receiving funding. Each year, they are reviewed and revised according to statute and updates within the Crime Commission. Please read through the standards carefully and thoroughly to ensure that you comply with the requirements of the program. The special conditions are included with the grant award contract that was emailed to you after your contingencies have been reviewed and approved. Be sure to obtain the appropriate signatures. Again, make a copy of your records, considering these are the requirements you are bound to. And if you have any questions, please ask. The original signed special conditions need to be returned with your grant award within 30 days of the date that you receive them. Grant management and reporting requirements can be divided into two areas, program and financial. The program reporting is individual youth data and quarterly activity narratives. The financial is monthly transactions and drawdown requests, formerly called cash reports. We do not utilize cash reports anymore. They went away with the paper process. Reporting requirements are listed in section 012 of rules and regulations, as well as the special conditions in Cba Guidebook. There are currently two reports that you submit in the compliance with the Community-Based Aid Juvenile Services Aid Program. First, you're reporting youth data and narratives into JCMS. Second, you are reporting expenditures as transactions and requesting drawdowns in GrantVantage. We're going to go over program management now. On the 15th of the month, the following end of each quarter, individual youth data and quarterly activity narratives are required to be entered in JCMS. The juvenile case management system will be utilized to enter individual level data of all youth participating in programs funded by the Community-Based Aid Juvenile Services Aid Program and the Juvenile Services Program. Additionally, the JCMS will be where the quarterly grant activity narratives will be submitted. JCMS requires individual certificates assigned by the agency and program type in order to access JCMS within the Secure Nebraska Crime Secure Nebraska Criminal Justice Information System, also known as NCJIS, data portal. At the beginning of the grant project period, grantees will register their programs through a survey distributed by the Juvenile Justice Institute. From this program registration, JCMS certificates will be received. Each individual entering individual youth data and/or quarterly narratives will need their own certificate. Each program type has individual youth data variables that are variable to be collected in order to effectively evaluate the program as required by Nebraska statute. The JCMS reporting for Community-Based Aid Juvenile Services Aid Program required variables document is posted on the Crime Commission website. Quarterly activity narratives are completed on the grant administration page on JCMS. Each program will enter a narrative by answering the questions on the screen and save the narrative. The lead contact for the grant is responsible for ensuring all the narratives are completed for each program and will submit the narrative, verifying the data entry and narratives are completed. The Juvenile Justice Institute has training guides and videos for data entry of individual youth data and quarterly grant narratives on their website. Missing data reports. On the month following the quarterly reporting deadline, the Crime Commission will release a missing data report for each program that indicates which required variables are missing for discharge cases over the previous 4 quarters. Grantees are responsible for ensuring programs access their missing data report and update their missing required variables. Failure to report required variables can result in suspension or termination of grant funds. Missing data reports will be emailed from Kevin Dahlman through a share file link. Program due dates. JCMS individual youth data and activity narratives are due quarterly, the 15th of the month following the end of the quarter. So example, July, September reporting is due October 15th. When the 15th falls on a weekend or holiday, the report is due the prior business day. So if it falls on a Saturday, it is due the Friday before. If the Friday is a holiday, it is due the Thursday before. Consequences for non-compliance are suspension and terminations of the funds. You can find this in Title 78, Chapter 1, Section 010. When out of compliance with any state or federal law or the guidelines or requirements set forth by the grant or conditions stated in the grant award packet. Section 012.01C, if the grantee does not submit reports by the required deadlines or submits a report that demonstrates failure to meet funding requirements, grantee will be provided a corrective action plan. With the corrective action plan, grantee will be given 10 working days to respond to correct the program deficiencies. If the grantee does not respond to corrective deficiencies in reporting requirements, refer to the Crime Commission or for termination of award. Project change requests. A project change request is a proposed alteration to the original grant award contract. There are 4 purposes for a project change request to be submitted, and they all need prior approval. Those 4 purposes are program modification, new project personnel, change of project period, or budget changes. Project personnel change form. This is a brand new form that we created to help track when there's any changes with the personnel on the grant. So in this case, it would be the lead project contact, secondary project contact, financial contact, or authorized official. This will be located on the Nebraska Crime Commission website, the Community-Based Aid page, and it's a PDF, so you can download it, fill it out, and send it in. The process for submitting a project change request, you will email the proposed change request, including an updated program type table, program narrative, and budgeted change narrative to Jesse and myself. Once the proposal has been reviewed, Jesse will add the new budget line item, and you will need to submit a budget change request in GrantVantage and narrative for review. After submitting the budget change request, you will need to send a communication through GrantVantage to Jesse that you have completed the request. Grant monitoring. For grant monitoring, you'll need to keep a copy of the application, grant award special conditions, forms, correspondence, copies of contracts, bills, invoices, cash reports, and quarterly activity monitors. Program monitors will could include facility tours and introduction of program staff, review of program plans, memo to file, and review of data and narrative reports. So with that, we are going to take a short break so that we can transition into the financial piece. So we will resume at 9:20 so that we can
talk about financial management. In just a minute. Okay, there we go. Financial management. So what does financial management mean? It is the proper stewardship of state resources, is an essential responsibility of award recipients and subrecipients. You must ensure that state funding and resources are used efficiently and effectively to achieve desired objectives. You should have management processes and controls in place that reasonably ensure all of the following. Funded programs achieve their intended results. Resources are used in a manner consistent with state agencies' mission. Programs and resources are protected from waste, fraud, abuse, and mismanagement, and laws and regulations are followed. Financial management system. As a grantee, you must have a financial management system in place that is able to record and report on the receipt, obligation, and expenditure of grant funds. Grantees must maintain detailed accounting records and documentation to track the following information: grant award and subawards, the amount, purpose, special conditions, and current status, grant funds expended and drawn down, itemized transactions, program income, and contracts expensed against the grant award. To ensure proper financial management, an adequate accounting system is required. An adequate accounting system allows you to maintain documentation to support all receipts, expenditures, and obligations of grant funds, like I just mentioned. As an adequate accounting system collects and reports financial data for planning, controlling, measuring, and evaluating direct costs. So what is an adequate accounting system? An adequate accounting system can be used to generate reports required by grant award and state regulations. Your system must support all of the following: financial reporting is accurate, current, complete, and compliant with all reporting requirements of your grant award. If you are a subgrantee of a grantee, establishment of reasonable procedures to ensure the receipt of reports on grantees' cash balances and cash disbursements is insufficient and enable them to prepare complete and accurate cash transaction reports to the Nebraska Crime Commission monthly, and account for awards separately, no commingling of funds. Your system should have all of the following capabilities: internal control. Your system should allow you to exercise effective control and accountability for all grant funds. Budget control. Your system should let you compare actual expenses or outlays with budgeted amounts for each award and subaward. Allowable costs. Your system should support you in making sure that you follow state cost principles, program regulations, and the terms of special conditions in determining the reasonableness and allowability of costs. Source documentation. Your system should require you to support accounting records with source documentation. Subgrantee monitoring. Your system should involve monitoring of drawdowns by subawards to ensure that they conform to the same standards as apply to the grantee. Co-mingling of funds, which I just mentioned, is your accounting system of all grantees and subgrantees must ensure that grant funds are not commingled with funds from other agencies. You must account for each award separately. Grantees and subgrantees are prohibited from commingling funds on either a program by program or project by project basis. Funds specifically budgeted and or received for one project may not be used to support another. And your general ledger accounting system cannot comply. If your general ledger accounting system cannot comply with this requirement, you should establish a system to adequately track funds according to each budget category. If your system does not make it possible to identify funds and expenditures with a particular program with the identification supported by source documentation, a financial monitor or audit of this program could result in the cost being questioned or even disallowed. So some responsibilities of the grantees. This includes recording of financial activity, which is the grantee should record in its records the transactions of its subawards and contracts. Non-state contributions applied to programs or projects by subgrantees should likewise be recorded, as should any program income resulting from program operations. Budgeting and budget review. The grantee should ensure that each subgrantee prepares an adequate budget on which its award commitment will be based. The details of each project budget should be kept on file by the grantee. And reporting irregularities. Grantees and their subgrantees are responsible for promptly notifying the Crime Commission of any illegal acts, irregularities, and or proposed or actual actions. Illegal acts and irregularities include conflicts of interest, falsification of records or reports, and misappropriation of funds or other assets. Retention of records. 5 years. You must retain all financial records, supporting documentation, statistical records, and all other records pertinent to the award for a period of 5 years from the date of submission of the final expenditure report or as required by law, whichever is longer. So regardless of what we ask you to attach in GrantVantage for transactions or what we may request in a monitor, you have to retain your records for 5 years. Records may be retained in an electronic format. They don't have to be paper copies. Grantees monitoring of subawards. Grantees are required during the grant period to monitor the use of state funds by all subgrantees. Grantees must monitor their subgrantees with the same level of detail that the Crime Commission monitors the grantee. And I'll talk more about this in just a minute. The grantee must have established written policies on sub-award or sub-grantee monitoring. Supplanting is the non-supplanting requirement mandates that grant funds cannot be used to supplant or replace local or tribal funds that would, in the absence of state funds, be made available for grant purposes. Instead, grant funds must be used to supplement or increase existing local or tribal funds that were already budgeted for grant purposes. CBA funds cannot be used to pay for existing employees unless the existing position is backfilled with a new hire. CBA funds cannot be used to pay for items or costs associated with the grant that the recipient is already obligated to pay for with state, local, or tribal funds. And state, local, or tribal funds previously budgeted for grant purposes cannot be reduced or reallocated to other purposes. And lastly, CBA funds cannot be used to reimburse any costs incurred prior to the official grant award start date. Procurement. All contracts supported with grant funds and equipment purchases must go through a procurement process. What that process entails depends on the agency that writes the contract. State agencies purchasing $2,000 and over, purchases that are $2,000 and over, must follow the procurement process that is governed by DAS. It is on the DAS website and has two manuals, one covering supplies and the other covering goods and commodities. Counties purchasing $5,000 and over, purchases of $5,000 and over, must follow the Nebraska state statute. And all other agencies, nonprofit, cities, etc., must follow their written procurement process. If there is no written procurement process, it reverts back to the issuing agency's procurement process. So drawdown requests and GrantVantage, which is formerly cash reports or cash requests. All grants are now managed in the GrantVantage system. Training on the GrantVantage is provided online via the learning management system by GrantVantage itself, as well as online training videos that were created by us at the Nebraska Crime Commission that are posted to our website. Transactions are to be entered timely. Expenditures should be reported within 2 months of the month of expenditure. There are a few exceptions. If something has to go through insurance, I understand that it could take a little bit longer, but we don't think that it's unreasonable to expect invoice 30 to 60 days at maximum for all other expenditures. It is the grantees' job to make sure that their programs and contracts and vendors are sending timely invoices so that they can be recorded in GrantVantage and requested as a drawdown. Drawdown requests are monthly. They're due by the 15th of the following month. As Trent said, if the 15th falls on a Saturday, it's the day prior. If the day prior is a holiday, it's the day prior to that. Always earlier, not later. And then final drawdown for the project is within 15 days of the end of the period. For transactions, we're almost in September now. So if you've not gotten an invoice from one of your subgrantees or contractors, you should probably be reaching out to them. We don't want to see 12 months worth of transactions entered in June next year just to play catch up. We want to see it monthly as kind of required by us. So some common issues that I see, transactions need to be reported in the month which they occur, not when they're invoiced and not when they're paid by the county or tribe. For example, your cell phone bill is invoiced the month after it incurs. So it's now August and you're probably getting your July bills or have already gotten your July bills. Those don't need to be entered in August. They should be entered in July because that's when the bills were actually for, not the invoice date, not the paid by county or tribe date. Another issue that we want to kind of address that we see pretty often, contract fees for service. So the Crime Commission will only reimburse for actual service hours provided. We can never pay on a contract that says the county will reimburse an agency X dollars per month regardless of hours worked or services provided. For example, it would be pretty strange to see transactions for the exact same amount each month for mediation services. It would depend on how many juveniles are in that program. So if the county has a contract for service with a mediation center, they would need to bill the county each month for the services they actually provided at their contract hourly rate. They would not divide the total grant request by 12 and request that every month. There are a few exceptions to this, but they're really few and far between. The other thing that we want to touch on is that administrative overhead is unallowable as indirect organizational costs, which I'll go into a little more detail on the next slide. So the use of grant funds, we kind of really want to stress the project period. So no costs before or after the project period. The project period is July 1st through June 30th. So any costs that were incurred in June of this month would have needed to be on the 2019 grant. They cannot be entered into this 2020 grant that started July 1st. Only items that actually happened in July can be in July, and then the same will go for the opposite of that. We don't want to see any July invoices preemptively added into the June request for last year or next year as it is. The community-based aid grant does not allow any administrative overheads. And so this is covered by the unallowable costs and activities. So some of these include office space, overtime, including bonuses, office supplies, the indirect organizational costs, which the RFA defines as a cost of an organization that are not readily assignable to a particular project, but are necessary to the operation of the organization and the performance of the project. So some examples of those costs, usually treated as indirect, include those incurred for facility operation and management, depreciation, and administrative salaries. So we don't allow for you to request reimbursement to pay an executive director's time to supervise the staff that are funded by the grant, or any other duties that are related to the administration of the agency in general. Also unallowable are construction costs, lobbying, food and beverage for meetings, other than food for youth, which is a different request, and then drug testing supplies, all unallowable. There is a more complete list that you can find in the handbook that we've referenced. So new this year, we've implemented an operational assessment tool. We call it the OAT for short. The purpose is to gain grant staff, to assist grant staff in effectively monitoring risks associated with the Nebraska Crime Commission grants, the adherence to the grantor's guidelines and agreements, budget adherence, assurance of proper internal controls being in place. The procedure, the risk level is determined by a score calculated on the assessment. So some of the items that are used to score this are controllable by the grantee. Some of them are not. Some examples are the agency experience, how long you've administered this grant, total funding amount, financial reporting, is it on time, is it without error, things like that. The deobligation history we do take into account, budget modifications, how often, how complex, and then grant complexity and critical contingencies, how many subawards, how many contractors, how many contingencies you have when writing your grant, and then other relevant factors, which can be many things. Sometimes it's if something is found on a monitor, we may use that to determine your risk for the next year, things like that. So the risk assessment, so there's high, medium, and low, and we call them level 3, 2, and 1. So for level 3, the requirement is 100% documentation of county and subaward personnel wages, operating expenses, and contract payments in GrantVantage to request drawdown with a yearly financial monitor. A level 2 is considered medium. It requires 100% documentation of county and subaward personnel wages in GrantVantage and a financial monitor every 2 years. And then a low risk, a level 1, requires no documentation and a financial monitor every 3 years. And I just want to add that just because we don't require any documentation, that doesn't mean that I won't occasionally have a question about something that I see in GrantVantage and then ask for documentation. It just means that you don't have to preemptively attach everything that the higher levels might require. So documentation. Reimbursement cannot be made until the required documentation has been reviewed and approved by the Crime Commission. Documentation will need to be presented with a clear accounting trail so that expenses can be clearly tracked in order for the reimbursement process to go smoothly. All agencies must scan required documentation and attach it to the appropriate transaction entered into GrantVantage. The reason that I say that is because I want the attachments on the transactions, not on the drawdown, which I know some people have done, and it's just easier for me to review if they're attached to the transactions. As a reminder, this pertains to the documentation that is required to be submitted as supporting documentation with your transactions based on the OAT level assessment. All documentation is still required to be retained and available upon request for the 5 years that we talked about earlier. So consequences for non-compliance. Funding is subject to suspension if reporting down requests are not received by required deadlines, discrepancies between financial reports and permissible uses of funding. Corrective action plans must be submitted within 10 working days of receiving notification of the discrepancy. And if the grantee continues to be out of compliance with financial reporting requirements after reasonable efforts to address the deficiencies in reporting, the funds will be deemed terminated. Financial monitors. The purpose of financial monitoring is to ensure that the grant award is being used for authorized purpose in compliance with state program and grant requirements, laws, regulations, and the grant award performance goals are achieved. The documentation requested for review during a financial monitor of the grantee may include, but not limited to, for personnel pay stubs, timesheets, hourly activity logs, and then for travel, mileage logs, lodging receipts, and itemized mail receipts. Operating expenses claims, itemized receipts, and itemized invoices. For contracts, it's contract, detailed invoices, and procurement process, paperwork. Subawards, contract, all documentation listed above, the procurement process documentation as well. Page 17 of the Cba Guidebook has a detailed list of all the supporting documentation that could be requested during a monitor. And as a reminder, and we cannot overstate this, please make sure that you have read and understand the guidebook and keep it handy. So that takes us to the closeout process of the grant. Grantees and sub-grantees will have 45 days after the end of the grant cycle to request outstanding invoices and close out the grant. The grant cycle ends June 30th. Invoices from July cannot be billed in the previous grant cycle. That process includes entering final invoices and requesting drawdown, filling out any deobligation letter that may be required if you have unspent funds, and then turning into Trent the program type table report, which is new, and I'll let him add a few details if he needs to on that. The 46th day, the grants are closed. So you have 45 days after the close of grant, which this year was August 14th, to have everything in and finalized. So here is a copy of the deobligation letter. Everything that is highlighted in yellow is the part, so I send out a form letter, and everything highlighted in yellow is what you need to really fill out. It needs to be correct. It must include your agency, the correct grant number. You need to identify the amount that's being deobligated and why. Deobligation letters are sent to both Trent and I, and you can send them right along with the program type table report. The program type table report is a new addition for this grant cycle. You will be required to submit this report at the end of the year with your deobligation letter, like I said. You'll need to list all program types that you are funding at the end of the grant cycle and the amount that was spent for each program type. And then that program type can be sent right along with your deobligation letter to both Trent and I. And Trent, did you have anything to add to that?
The only thing that I'll add for the program type table report is I'm still working on getting it made. Once I get it created, we will add it to the website, and I will let everyone know that it is available, which we do have some time on that. So that's all.
Perfect. So here, a list of everyone that works in the Juvenile Programs and Interventions Division. It's Amy Hoffman is our director. Trent and I are grant administrators, and Christy is our staff support. So here's the information we just want to make sure that you reach out, like Trent said in the beginning, don't wait until you're in the weeds. Reach out with any questions. You're never bothering us. It's what we're here for. Anytime with any questions or concerns, we're always here to assist you and make this process as smooth as possible with the reporting and everything that goes along with receiving these CBA funds or JS funds. And with that, I guess we'll open it up to some questions. So if you guys have some questions you'd like us to answer, here on this training, you can type your questions into the chat box. Make sure you put it to all panelists so that we can all see it. And then if you want to privately reach out to Trent or I, feel free to do that as well. But we have some time here. We can answer some questions if you have any. So please let us know.
Jesse, Steve had a question. He wanted you to repeat the information about monthly billing of actual expenses versus 1/12 of the subgrantee award. It sounds like one of his subs has already done that for July. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. So what I mean by that, Steve and everyone, is that instead of taking, if you have for one of your contracts, say you've requested $5,000 for that line item, we don't want you to just take that $5,000 and divide it by 12 and request that amount every month. That's really not how we need that. We need this done. So we will only reimburse for actual hours worked. So if you have a contractor that is working with juveniles, they need to report their hours to you and request that amount. Hours times their hourly amount equals how much we will reimburse, not just a flat amount of $500 every month. Excuse me. And if you want, I can call you later and we can kind of chat about that a little more. I'd like to hear what program is maybe doing that. And I will say that there, with GrantVantage and us really tracking line item by line item, we're able to see a lot more. I think that some of those practices are more commonplace than we would have imagined, and it's no one. I don't think anyone had known that was how some things were being requested before. Now we know, so we're trying to fix all that. But yeah, we can chat later in more detail about that if you'd like.
Okay, Lee has a question. How should wages when the hours of the last week of June isn't actually paid to the employee until the third week of July?
That's a great question. So what I always tell everyone is that obviously with wages, they cross months, and if they cross months, sometimes they're going to cross grant cycles. I always tell everyone whatever the primary month of payment would be is where we want it to go. However, if you don't actually receive, so if it's over into July by a couple days, I would still consider that a June payment. So you should have it by the end by July to be able to report it. And that's why we give you 45 days at the end of a grant cycle so that we can make sure all those types of things are in. Occasionally, I will say, as it's been brought to my attention, it's exactly even, half in one month, half in another for a pay period. In which case I will say I don't have a preference which it's in, as long as you're consistent. So if you have, I think there were maybe a couple last year, if I remember right, somebody pointed out to me. So if you always put it in the first month and you call that the primary month, I would like you to do it in the first month every single time. If you choose to do it in the second month, I would prefer that every single time. Does that make sense?
Well, that makes sense to me. Yeah, Lee says yes, thanks.
Okay.
The next question, do the juvenile services grant reimbursements need to be submitted monthly, or is it still quarterly? I can answer that. The juvenile services grants are allowed to remain on quarterly reporting for this year, but starting in the next grant in 2021, everyone at the Crime Commission will be on monthly. But the juvenile services people can, by all means, request monthly if they choose to. Let's see. For program, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, there's a question. Program reporting, do we submit a quarterly report in addition to JCMS report? No. Your JCMS report is the program.
So Deco, you'll see when you get into JCMS and do your quarterly reporting, the quarterly report is submitted on JCMS now. You don't have to submit as a Word document like you were in the past. You go into JCMS and you answer 3 questions on the grant administration page in JCMS. Another question, the record keeping that you talked about, are the requirements all met by using GrantVantage, or do we also need to keep a separate running budget to meet the guidelines mentioned?
Yes, you should have an adequate accounting system on your own. You should have your own accounting system to match. So GrantVantage is really my accounting system, but I would expect you to have one as well.
Okay, Denise asked, how are we notified of our risk level? Jesse would have emailed that to you.
Yeah, Denise, I can send that to you.
Okay. A question, future forecasting, do you foresee more funds in the upcoming year as the need is increasing in the state? I wish we could answer that. We have no idea of knowing what the legislature is going to do. I actually anticipate the funds going down due to budget cuts because of COVID. I don't anticipate getting more money for grants, but I wish I had a crystal ball and could tell you that. Sorry. Okay.
And I will send you this link once it's done recording, as well as the product for future reference.
And I just want to reiterate one more time, just because I think this is a surprise to some of the grantees. If you have sub awards where they have their own budget and they sign their own award special conditions this year with you, they have to submit an actual invoice to you monthly on what they spent that month, not 1/12 of their award.
Right.
So I guess we can't emphasize that enough, that you can only reimburse them for what they actually need to be reimbursed. So if you have questions or are struggling with that, please reach out to us sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't look like there's any more questions coming in. So we just want to thank everyone for taking the time out of their day. Hope it wasn't too painful. And Jesse, anything else?
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Again, if you have any additional questions or you think of something later after all of this kind of resonates with you, feel free to reach out. I have plenty of time to talk to anyone who needs some additional information. Thank you.
And if you joined this meeting with a coworker and you're sitting in their office with them and your name's not on this list of attendees, then you need to let us know that you attended. Otherwise, we won't know you're there.